Hello there, this is Steve here in Sydney of the lay gnosis website truebluehealer.com. I'm going to talk to you here about the utter failure, abject failure of the pseudo-skeptic movement and how it's been checked in a number of unexpected but very significant places. In case you don't know, the pseudo-skeptic movement is that bunch of young men all over the internet who head-kick religious people and proponents of telepathy, ESP, and they always claim to be rational thinkers and rational atheists, that sort of thing. They are connected to the new atheist movement, and what else can I tell you about them for a quick summary? Their public leaders are shallow intellectuals such as Richard Dawkins, Professor Lawrence Krauss, James Randi, who never even finished school. But these people, Neil deGrasse Tyson is another one. He seems to be a token nice man who is put in between James Randi and Richard Dawkins at skeptic meetings where they talk about this strange word gullible. They talk about the word gullible all the time. I will explain this to you in a minute. The pseudo-skeptic movement consists of about 3 different groups of people who are very confused and with overlapping boundaries and that sort of thing. You have mildly autistic people. Some of them are Asperger's, obviously. They have a distinct dislike of religion, a great suspicion toward it. They are often highly literalistic in their interpretation of anything you write to them. And surprisingly, they have a corresponding similitude to religious fundamentalists who read the Bible in a bizarre, literal way when it's obviously a metaphorical document. Another group of people in the pseudo-skeptic movement that's probably head-kicked you, dear viewer, would be the mentally feeble people who can only connect about 2, 3 or 4 thoughts together in series at any one time. Then they collapse back into non-thought. The end result is they can never formulate their own opinions. You ask these people for an opinion on anything, you get silence. They don't have an opinion about anything. So the end result is, because they're so mentally feeble, they end up being incredibly gullible because they must, by lack of athletic intellectual vigour, accept everything they hear because they can't dispute it. They lack the mental vigour. One day they wake up to the fact that they are incredibly gullible and it shocks them so much they go through an extended time of self-loathing and they vow to become professional disbelievers, non-believers, unbelievers for the rest of their life. In fact, it's self-punishment for themselves. For one thing, for being so gullible and finally seeing it. But they lack the intellectual gumption to do anything about it. So the next best thing they can do is adopt opinions. Basically, they get what is a prosthesis personality implant of James Randi's personality, which consists of about 8 maxims and 20 keywords to dispute anyone they meet with on the internet. Any interlocutor gets hit with these 8 maxims and 20 keywords and rhetorical demands, and they still can't give you an opinion though, because they can't connect more than 3 or 4 thoughts at once. So asking them for an opinion is pointless, and really that's a good test of how mentally agile, energetic they are. And in fact, you'll discover most pseudo-skeptics are mentally feeble, okay? And they're very, very angry. And this is connected to father deficiency. It affects their brain development. There's now scientific evidence proving this. I'll give you a link below. Another portion of the pseudo-skeptic movement is militant gays who engage in pure hate toward religious people for a few reasons. A, they're often father deficient. They're often very angry about their personal disposition. How did I turn out like this? And quite different to all those nice normal people over there. So it's easy for them to blame other people, anonymous interlocutors they wish to head kick. Anyone, that's you. Anyone they can hold in conversation they want to head kick. They're often more intelligent though, and their specialty is slow acid sarcasm, and they wish to have a dispute with you, but you slowly notice that everything he says is about you only, and carefully staying away from the subject matter of the conversation or the video that the dispute is about. All he does is heap abuse on you, right? So that's another kind of pseudo-skeptic. Those 3 or 4 groups are all rolled into one on the internet, and it's hard to pick one from the other. They often work in gangs. So we have this ragtag army of volunteer, barefoot, malcontented young men patrolling the internet, head-kicking people seemingly randomly, but concentrating on religious people and proponents of telepathy. Now you might ask, why do they do this? And it's because of the personality implant they have received from James Randi, consisting of about 8 maxims and about 20 keywords, you see. Try and engage them in conversation outside that and they fail to produce any useful replies. You will notice this. So what makes this ragtag army work so well? Believe it or not, this ragtag army of pseudo-skeptics, and you can look that up in Wikipedia, there's a lengthy entry, it's one of their own words to describe their own worst members of their group. Pseudo-skeptics is in Wikipedia, have a good read, and the best part of the explanation is the second part down. It's a long entry, is by Susan Blackmore, who says that they're all dysfunctional men desperately avoiding personal experience. That gives you a clue. That's her point of view, looking from CSICOP, C-O-P, established in 1976, okay? So that's in Wikipedia. Look it up under pseudo-skeptics. Now you've really got to ask, how does this group of people always provide someone popping up, say on UK television, as the final word in some subject? And they're actually anonymously funded to the tune of about $9.5 million annually, which is a lot over a 40-year period since 1976. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? So there's big money behind this. And when we look at who set up the CSICOP, that's a head kick for you, a political, social head kick from afar, was called CSICOP, a play on words obviously meant there, tongue-in-cheek. It was set up by Paul Kurtz, who was the editor of the Humanist magazine, which is an anti-religious publication. Now there's nothing wrong with being anti-religious, it's okay, except you've got to ask the question, why would anyone dedicate their life to putting out an anti-religious magazine? Well, Paul Kurtz also publishes Prometheus Books, which advocates sexual perversions in a variety of books, including necrophilia, cannibalism, homosexuality, animal philias, and most notably pedophilia. Pedophilia is the big thing in Prometheus Books, and you will notice that over the last 40 years, Dawkins and Krauss, not 40 years, they both came in later than that, but Dawkins and Krauss are persistent apologists for pedophilia, incest, that sort of thing. Nothing really much too wrong with that. And Lawrence Krauss has publicly defended his best friend, who was jailed for 15 months for crimes of pedophilia. Remember the sentence there, 15 months. I've got something to tell you in a minute. 15 months. It was considered too harsh a sentence at the time when Lawrence Krauss's best friend was convicted of pedophilia. And Lawrence Krauss came along and did a great big public apology saying, well, his best friend never did anything in front of him. So in his best scientific empirical analysis, he pronounced his best friend innocent. He couldn't have done any of the crimes that the court convicted him of, which shows just how unscientific Lawrence Krauss really is. Now you also know that Richard Dawkins has been an apologist soft on pedophilia for the last 20 odd years, since 1980 something, when he got his chair from Oxford. where he began talking allegedly not about evolution, not about science, but about the public understanding of science. His chair is a propagandist seat. That's all it is. And he's a pretty poor propagandist at that, because while he's calling for the Pope to be hanged for crimes against humanity, for his priesthood and what they do with children, he himself apologises for soft pedophilia. So what game is he playing? Condemning and promoting pedophilia at the same time. What's he actually doing? Why, Richard Dawkins is in fact playing both sides of the fence, working for the pedophilia message of Paul Kurtz from Prometheus Books in 1976. Prometheus Books still sells books on human sexual perversion of all kinds, attempting to sell them to you for some very shallow pseudo-skeptic reasons. And one of their big aims is to lower the age of consent to the age of 13. So if you could ever get this past the English-speaking world's legal systems, it would be, if ever the pseudo-skeptic movement could head-kick enough people, including legislators and judicial systems, into relaxing the laws against pedophilia, lowering the age of consent. That's Barbara Hewson advocating this in a British court, defending celebrity pedophiles. Lower the age of consent to 13. Do you realise what that means, dear viewer? That your children approached by pedophiles, you have no legal recourse to intervene if they're 13 or over. You've lost the power over your children. So they're doing this in steps of gradualism. And the next step would clearly be another 40-year program to abolish the age of consent altogether, so that the world would become a pedophile's playground. Okay? That's the goal of Paul Kurtz's Prometheus Books, which set up Psychop in 1976. Continues to this day with confusing, conflicting message of condemnation of religious-based pedophilia, but other kinds of pedophilia are really okay, and we mustn't be too hard on pedophilia. Okay? Richard Dawkins says that he's got a long history of apologising for pedophilia. Lawrence Krauss gets up against Christian debaters like Lane Craig and forever pleads the case of homosexual sheep. This keeps coming up over and over again in every debate that Dr. Lawrence Krauss, alleged astrophysicist, comes up against William Lane Craig, always going on and always putting in a commercial for the homosexual sheep. You've got to ask the question, why is he doing this? Well, it seems to connect with Prometheus Books way back from 1976. It's a continuous message of trying to sell sexual perversion and normalise it, okay? Just by repetition, hearing it in every debate, you think homosexual sheep are going to be fine one day and they can all become good Christians. Well, it's a pathetic idea to follow that you can persuade people speaking like this about astrophysics and putting in commercials for homosexual sheep. He's the only person who does this too, by the way. So he's a one-off peculiar person. And now here I'm going to tell you the utter failure of the pseudo-skeptic movement to change the laws about pedophilia, soften them, water them down and eliminate them over a 40-50 year period since 1976, instigated by Paul Kurtz of Prometheus Books. It was such a shocking case of pedophilia with Ian Watkins convicted in Wales. He's a British pop singer with a large entourage, a large following of groupies. Ian Watkins did such despicable sexual things with babies, not children, babies, that Ian Watkins, the pop singer, was sentenced to, wait for it, 29 years in jail for pedophilia, crimes against babies, by a British judge. And the two groupie women who supplied their almost newborn babies to him for his sexual pleasure, they got 15 and 16 years respectively. Now, if you don't find that a strong rebuttal, think again. There's more to this. The case was so shocking, celebrity pedophiles caused the British legal system to hand down new sentencing rules to British judges about how to sentence celebrity pedophiles such as Ian Watkins and that other English one, if he'd been caught, who died at 85, Jimmy Savile. They're not allowed to just get fines now for being caught in possession with child pornography, okay? It's got to be some kind of sentence where you either do community service or even custodial, okay? This is the intention to tighten the sentences to make them more rigorous. So the Ian Watkins case, a celebrity pedophilia case, so staggered the British legal community that new sentencing laws were handed down to judges, so that celebrities like Jimmy Savile and Ian Watkins had to get custodial sentences, and abolished were the small fines for having pictures of babies and children on your hard drive, okay? So, this is a resounding rebuttal of the 40-50 year campaign by the pseudoskeptic movement to lower the age of consent to 13, as advocated by Barbara Hewson defending these celebrity pedophiles. I'll give you links for all this stuff, and you can join the dots and see history appearing as a great long narrative, okay? Everything I say to you here is supported by links, and I want you to join the dots as a concerned person. So we got here a resounding rebuttal, a very, very resounding rebuttal of the concealed social agenda of the pseudo-skeptic movement, which claims to be rational. Ha ha ha. Implication being that you are irrational for having a different opinion. The fact is, the so-called rational thinkers, their argument is self-defeating. But that doesn't matter. It's good to debate on big TV shows, isn't it? And all over YouTube. And meanwhile, they're trying to advance the cause of pedophilia underneath the movement. And Krauss and Dawkins have been doing this for 20-odd years. Okay? Now, having brought to you the complete failure of the pseudo-skeptic movement to legalise pedophilia and lower the age of consent to 13, giving pedophiles open slather with your children and totally removing any legal recourse you might have in intervening against a pedophile with your own children. I'm going to tell you something else that started for me about 30 years ago, I think. I do remember reading a prediction by some gifted psychic. I don't recall the name right now. I'll try and remember it. But it was someone like Edgar Casey or possibly C.W. Leadbeater. I think it was him. He came to Australia in the 1920s. He was an English vicar and a very, very gifted psychic who described atomic structure before Western science knew about it in the 30s. Okay? It might have been C.W. Leadbeater, and he said something that to me in the 1980s was incomprehensible, and it was simply this: that one day the moral leading light in the world would be Russia. I thought this was preposterous because they were an authoritarian state of the worst kind, something worse than Nazi Germany, with a vast number of its own population continually in jail for thought crimes, you see. So in the 1970s and the 80s, that's how silly C.W. Leadbeater's prediction looked, that Mother Russia would become the great leading moral light of the world. But now, to our utter surprise, the communist empire has collapsed, and Vladimir Putin is hosting the Winter Olympics in a week or two, and he's made resounding steadfast opposition to the advancement of the homosexual campaign and pedophilia in Russia. He has said in a recent television interview, I think it was yesterday, that the Olympics is about sport, not about political and social propagandising homosexuality and pedophilia. There are strict laws against this in Russia. Vladimir Putin's Russia is determined not to let the homosexual sort of pedophilia, homosexual influence degrade Russian society. Now, he's got scientific support for doing this. The Russians already maintain with their own research that homosexual couples can't bring up adopted heterosexual children. They just can't do it. They don't provide the right role models, and you don't get the right brain development. Well, we've just got a Canadian study showing that father deficiency causes brain damage. Okay, I can't see how a pair of lesbians bringing up a child with all kinds of love and all that, no matter how hard they try, they're going to create a father deficiency. And this is now known to cause brain damage. It's proven in animals and people. So Vladimir Putin is becoming the predicted moral force around the world. Common sense and evidence-based thinking, rather than angry emotions from the homosexual and pedophile community, is taking precedence in Russia. And the rest of the Western world has collapsed and given in to the idea that there should be no rules and there should be social chaos, and anyone can raise a child, anything can raise a child, any combination of parents can raise a child, when all the scientific evidence points at the opposite. I'll give you links below this video to that effect. Make your own conclusions, please. So, summarising the very confusing, topsy-turvy situation we have gone through to get to this point, the pseudo-skeptic movement that's been promoting pedophilia and homosexuality through Richard Dawkins, Dr. Lawrence Krauss and the like, James Randi, who complains about his own father deficiency, has been totally rebutted by the British legal system, with harsher laws being handed down than ever before for celebrity pedophiles such as Jimmy Savile, that you are familiar with, and Ian Watkins, who got 29 years for sexual crimes against babies. Can you believe it? That's the end goal of Paul Kurtz, who recently died, by the way, but his Prometheus sexual perversion book library carries on. You will notice that the homosexual community argue against religion using pseudo-skepticism. That's very shallow reasoning that doesn't pan out if you just think about it for a while. It's always been part of the gay movement, using pseudo-skepticism to try and convince people with the most shallow, pathetic reasoning. The idea that anything can raise children, say perhaps 2 teddy bears, is okay to raise a child as long as the teddy bears have lots of love in them, is pathetic and shallow and utterly disproven by the Canadian study linked below this video. Now, that's at a low level in the media in the Western world, but it's now become part of international politics, with Vladimir Putin saying the Winter Olympics, which starts very soon, is not to be a venue for promoting homosexualization and pedophilia of Russian society. So suddenly, Russia's they've drawn the line in the sand. It's exactly what I think the psychic C.W. Leadbeater said in the 1920s, that one day Russia would lead the world. So now we've got a rebuttal of the pseudo-skeptic idea that anything can raise children. Any combination, teddy bear and panda bear, woman, dog and cat, can raise children, is utterly false. Vladimir Putin has that fixed opinion. Russian society seems to. And that's a very big rebuttal of the pseudo-skeptic movement that has head-kicked nearly every Christian on the internet. Okay, so the 40 Years' War by Psychops since 1976 has utterly failed. They're up against Vladimir Putin. He's not so easy to contain. See, Vladimir Putin will not allow him and his society to be bulldozed by this bourgeois, Western, liberal, anything can raise children concept. You can make up your own mind about this. Watch television, watch the Winter Olympics. Read up on Paul Kurtz and Prometheus books. I'll give you acres of references below this video to make up your own connections. I'll give you the dots, you join them. Okay, Steve here in Sydney, over and out. Can I just add a couple of postscript thoughts here that will probably resonate with you if I describe a couple of things to you. One of them is that Russia has a long history, because of its large population spread over a vast area, I think it's a third of the world's land surface, of abandoned children being found in forests. Some of them respond to therapy when they're found. These are the kids that howl like wolves, run on hands and knees, that sort of thing. Some of them, given enough care, do recover, learn to speak, and can live a normal life in a society when they're finally looked after sufficiently, given enough parenting, basically, that they were missing out on previously. And the other people, the extreme cases where the found boy can never do more than howl like a wolf and remain on his hands and knees, they were probably retarded babies left in the forest by despairing parents who wanted to put all their effort into healthy children rather than defective ones. I'm not making any judgment of that, but it's a thing that animals certainly do. We all know about abandoned babies in the animal kingdom, don't we? But there's other children that mimic the bird calls. That's all they can do, is mimic bird calls. So they've had kind of sort of like the bird population as parent figures to converse with. And they don't turn out well. They are damaged and require a lot of therapy and care and extra parenting when they're recovered. Some of them do learn to speak, okay? Now, Russia is replete with these stories of children found in forests. And the general conclusion is that they're all parent deficient in a gross way. So the Victorian idea that apes can raise children in the story of Tarzan by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which would seemingly be almost embraced by the gay community, that anything can raise children as long as they're loving, they can be gorillas or anything, is simply false. And there's science to back it up from Canada in the linked study below. Okay? Now, one more thing on father deficiency and sort of what you might call, I'll be pillorying for this, the degeneracy, the Western degeneracy coming into Russia that Putin's trying to stop. He's seeing the moral degeneracy, the acceptance of perversions as immorality that has to be, he seems to be the one man saying it's gone far enough and we're going to stop it. It's not going to contagion its way into Russian society with the Winter Olympics. I'll just point something else out to you about women's lib and where it came from. And I'm going to quote none other than the great statesman of Russia, Mikhail Gorbachev. He did write, and I remember reading this somewhere, that women's lib was first put into place in 1917 to turn men against women and split the family system, where women declared war on men. And the idea was to break down the heavily entrenched Tsarist society and smash it to pieces so that everyone would look to the new Soviet government instead of having real family members. Gorbachev says the big mistake they made was it worked. It did smash the Tsarist regime, but it did permanent damage to the Soviet regime for its entire lifespan of about 80 years because they left women's lib feminism running, or forever attacking men, turning women against men. And Gorbachev concluded at the end of this statement that feminism played a role in the collapse of the Soviet Empire because they forgot to turn feminism off in the early 20s or 30s. They kept it going, left it running, because everyone grew up and thought it was normal for women to be demeaning men all the time. Okay, so Gorbachev, look at a man there with a span of knowledge, a great academic that he was, and a major statesman on the world stage, and that's his take on feminism. Okay, and it just comes back to this father deficiency thing. Makes you wonder, where do all these feminists in the Western world come from? Are many of them father deficient also? Okay, so I'll leave you with that afterthought. Okay. Steve here in Sydney, over and out. at once. So asking them for an opinion is pointless, and really that's a good test of how mentally agile, energetic they are. And in fact, you'll discover most pseudo-skeptics are mentally feeble, okay? And they're very, very angry. And this is connected to father deficiency. It affects their brain development. There's now scientific evidence proving this. I'll give you a link below. Another portion of the pseudo-skeptic movement is militant gays who engage in pure hate toward religious people for a few reasons. A, they're often father deficient. They're often very angry about their personal disposition. How did I turn out like this? And quite different to all those nice normal people over there. So it's easy for them to blame other people, anonymous interlocutors they wish to head kick. Anyone, that's you. Anyone they can hold in conversation they want. Hello there, this is Steve here in Sydney of the lay gnosis website truebluehealer.com. I'm going to talk to you here about the utter failure, abject failure of the pseudo-skeptic movement and how it's been checked in a number of unexpected but very significant places. In case you don't know, the pseudo-skeptic movement is that bunch of young men all over the internet who head kick religious people and proponents of telepathy, ESP, and they always claim to be rational thinkers and rational atheists, that sort of thing. They are connected to the new atheist movement, and what else can I tell you about them for a quick summary? Their public leaders are shallow intellectuals such as Richard Dawkins, Professor Lawrence Krauss, James Randi, who never even finished school. But these people are in a time of self-loathing, and they vow to become professional disbelievers, non-believers, unbelievers for the rest of their life. In fact, it's self-punishment for themselves. For one thing, for being so gullible and finally seeing it. But they lack the intellectual gumption to do anything about it. So the next best thing they can do is adopt opinions. Basically, they get what is a prosthesis personality implant of James Randi's personality, which consists of about 8 maxims and 20 keywords to dispute anyone they meet with on the internet. Any interlocutor gets hit with these 8 maxims and 20 keywords and rhetorical demands, and they still can't give you an opinion though, because they can't connect more than 3 or 4 thoughts. Neil deGrasse Tyson is another one. He seems to be a token nice man who is put in between James Randi and Richard Dawkins at skeptic meetings, where they talk about this strange word gullible. They talk about the word gullible all the time. I will explain this to you in a minute. The pseudo-skeptic movement consists of about 3 different groups of people who are very confused and with overlapping boundaries and that sort of thing. You have mildly autistic people. Some of them are Asperger's, obviously. They have a distinct dislike of religion, a great suspicion toward it. They are often highly literalistic in their interpretation of anything you write to them. And surprisingly, they have a corresponding similitude to religious fundamentalists who read the Bible in a bizarre, literal way when it's obviously a metaphorical document. Another group of people in the pseudo-skeptic movement that's probably head-kicked you, dear viewer, would be the mentally feeble people who can only connect about 2, 3 or 4 thoughts together in series at any one time. Then they collapse back into non-thought. The end result is they can never formulate their own opinions. You ask these people for an opinion on anything, you get silence. They don't have an opinion about anything. So the end result is, because they're so mentally feeble, they end up being incredibly gullible, because they must, by lack of athletic intellectual vigour, accept everything they hear because they can't dispute it. They lack the mental vigour. One day they wake up to the fact that they are incredibly gullible, and it shocks them so much they go through an extended